Welcome to Face to Face. This is a show about change and about what's next. It's a show that wants to ask questions, peel back the layers of our average everyday experience, and go beyond scratching the surface. We interview amazing people with incredible ideas and stories who have done wild, weird, and wonderful things. Remember that imagination shared creates collaboration, and collaboration creates community, and community inspires social change. I'm David Peck, and this is Face to Face. So my interview today is with Roger Thurow. He is a former, I guess he's still a journalist. He's a former journalist with the Wall Street Journal. He spent 30 years with them and 20 years as foreign correspondent. So we talk a great deal about a whole lot of things, but most importantly, we talk about his new book, The First 1,000 Days, and it's really all about malnutrition and malnutrition globally. And we talk about these four mothers, these four families that Roger follows, that create this narrative thread to the cost behind malnutrition and some of the interconnected implications of it all and the unintended consequences. As you said, we talk about foreign policy, and we talk about his mantra, which is outrage and inspire, which I think you're going to find really interesting. We talk about agricultural development, and we talk about hunger in the 21st century, and we talk about something called the gray matter infrastructure. I mean, how cool is that? And we talk about the cost of or the costs of inaction. You're going to enjoy this conversation. Roger, in his own words, would say he gets carried away, and it's great, and it's energetic, and there's passion and commitment, and I think you're going to love every minute of it. So please tune in for the full interview with Roger Thurow coming right up. DavidPeckLive.com for more information about my speaking and my writing and my podcasting, but also Rabble.ca for a whole slew of other podcasts that you can find out more about on Rabble.ca. Roger Thurow coming right up. Well, welcome to Face to Face. We're joined by a very special guest today, Roger Thurow. He's from the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. He's a senior fellow there. He's an expert of a particular sort and former journalist with the Wall Street Journal. Roger, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. Delighted.
So, I mean, there's so many places we could start. 30 years with Wall Street Journal, is that right?
Yes, 30 years. Whoever thought I would stay at one place for such a long time. But of that time, 20 of those years I was overseas as a foreign correspondent. So every 4, 5, 6 years or so was off to new place, new stories, new adventures. And so I think that kept it all very fresh.
So before we start talking about your book, because I definitely want to do that. What do you I mean, I love these kinds of questions. These sort of, what's the one lesson you took away? I mean, what do you take away from 30 years overseas? I mean, obviously it was back and forth by the sounds of it, but what do you take away and sort of build? I don't know, a new perspective, a different worldview.
Yeah, I think it was fascinating. Kind of, so the time that I first went overseas in 1982 to Bonn, West Germany, when there still was a West Germany, and then so I was there for 4 years, and that was during the time of the Cold War.
Sure.
Was raging and kind of all the aspects with that. Then I was in South Africa for about 4.5, 5 years, from then 86 to 91, and that was the last brutal years of apartheid and increasing opposition, increasing repression. Then Mandela was released. While I was there, was in Cape Town that day, and then there for a year while he was on the international and national stage. And then I think, what one sees is you get an appreciation for the impact of, say, particularly from my perspective as an American, the impact of American foreign policy and things that are said that, there might be, say, the unintended consequences, because the effect, both, kind of economically that it can have, but then also kind of on the attitudes that people then form towards the United States, based on things. For instance, one of the times that one stage when I was in Bonn, the defense secretary in the U.S., I think it was Caspar Weinberger, perhaps, Reagan administration, and he was saying something about the prospect of a winnable nuclear war, which meant that, I'm sitting in West Germany at the time, and the Germans heard that, and they, their hair was fairly standing on end collectively, because a winnable nuclear war would have meant that kind of all the nuclear missiles landed on Germany, both East Germany and West Germany, and because that's where kind of a lot of them they were targeted at the time, figuring if there's going to be another conventional war during that time, well, it probably would have been on that territory, and so the French weapons were aimed at Germany. Some of the Soviet weapons would have been too, and so or East Germany and West Germany, and so you kind of just see how a statement like that, from the consumption of the American population or foreign policy apparatus, that there's a debate about that, a wageable and winnable nuclear war. But if you're sitting over there, it's like, oh, geez, that would mean basically the end of us. So I don't know who's winnable, would be winnable from their perspective.
Define winnable.
Right. Yeah. Precisely. Yeah. What are you left with after that?
Wow. I mean, from anybody's perspective, frankly,
Exactly.
Right. Wow. Just so, how did I guess the question? So many questions popped to mind, but how have we survived? How have we managed?
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating thing that you had. I mean, and then it was, then there was basically kind of the Big Bang, not kind of the nuclear bang that we were all, fearing, or that the whole, kind of Cold War apparatus was set about, but the Big Bang of history that happened. Yeah. All basically within a 3 or 4 month period at that time, with the fall of the Berlin Wall in November of '89. And then, so I was, kind of familiar with that story, having covered Germany for so long. And then the release of Mandela then in February of 1990. So in that time frame between, say, that November and early February, two things that, most of us living at the time would have said, well, those things will never happen.
Right.
Fall of the Berlin Wall, ostensibly the end of communism in Europe, and the release of Nelson Mandela and the end of apartheid. It was like, now those things won't happen. But they did within that short period of time. And then then you look at kind of all the forces that have been released in the world since then. And then kind of this, I think somebody wrote that, well, it was the end of history.
Right.
But obviously that's nonsense.
That was Fukuyama, I believe.
Fukuyama, right. And then all this history that has come since then, because then after being based in South Africa for those almost 5 years, then I moved to Vienna, always still with the Wall Street Journal, and in Vienna. So, and then in kind of early '91 or so, or mid '91, was going to write about then moving there to basically cover the burgeoning democracy and capitalism in Eastern Europe. And within months of moving to Vienna, then Yugoslavia began to violently disintegrate, and I was the closest person to closest Wall Street Journal reporter to that area, and so that for me then became a commutable civil war. I mean, it was a 4-hour drive from our house in Vienna to, say, the Esplanade Hotel in Zagreb, Croatia, and then Zagreb, the capital of Croatia, had come under air attack. At some stage.
Did you refer to it as a commutable civil war?
Yeah, because I would drive down.
Maybe the craziest statement I've ever heard. Yeah, that's hilarious.
Right. So I'd kind of throw my flak jacket in the back of the car, the back seat of the car, and drive down.
Wow.
And then, both our children were born while we were in Vienna, and so that then, as shortly, so at that time, I'm starting to think about, this isn't kind of the reporting that I should, be involved in anymore. And my wife at one stage said something eminently sensible and very wise, that, if you go into a place where you need a flak jacket, you probably shouldn't be going there.
That's right. And
I said, yeah, absolutely so. And so,
yeah, it should be more like, honey, do you have your lunch bag? Not, honey, do you have your flak jacket? Yeah. Yeah. Hey,
you're forgetting your lunch, as opposed to, hey, do you have your flak jacket?
Yeah.
And so it was kind of, at that stage then that as a foreign correspondent and somebody kind of in the midst of all that, is figuring, there's other stories that I prefer to be covering that won't necessarily put me on the front line of kind of civil wars and that kind of conflict and mayhem.
So
and the journal, the editors were fine with that because they fully understood, the circumstances that the various reporters will have. And so then after that, I really started writing a lot about humanitarian and development issues, and that's then what really brings me into this topic that so moves me and kind of the passion of my journalism. Then it's basically hunger in the 21st century and the shame and absurdity, obscenity that we brought this medieval suffering with us into the 21st century in this brand new millennium of ours, and kind of how dare we, and the negligence and the unintended consequences, say, of our policies that have been perpetuating that.
So knowing that, it's a great phrase, by the way, this obscenity in the 21st century that we brought into us, this medieval sort of way. As a journalist, you've seen a lot. You could go on. I think I hear a positive tone in your voice. I mean, is it just more? Is it just more of the same, Roger? That whole history doomed to repeat itself kind of stuff. I mean, you just move from 4-hour communal war, winnable nuclear war, civil war, winnable nuclear war. It just is. Are we just sort of? Is it repetition?
Yeah. Well, I think repetition in the sense that kind of these threats, the conflicts, this kind of needless suffering and poverty in the world that we either seem oblivious to, or if we know about it, we don't care that much. I mean, Bono has a phrase, he calls it stupid poverty.
Yes.
Where so many people are still dying or getting so sick in societies and being so weakened by the bite of a mosquito. That hunger is still with us, even though there's certainly enough food in the world that's being produced. So basically on a caloric and energy basis, or to provide energy for everybody to live kind of a normal active life, but it's obviously not being equitably distributed. So it's kind of still these injustices of things like hunger and poverty that remain. And you look at something like hunger, and it's kind of above all a political condition. We know how to end hunger. It's not like we're waiting for somebody in a lab coat to discover a cure for hunger or malnutrition. No, we know what to do. But it's this political will that says, finally, let's do something about this. How can we live in a world of this? So in this most recent book, The First 1,000 Days, I mean, it's so I've kind of throughout all this that my journalistic mantra that has developed, like my mantra would be outrage and inspire. So through my reporting and writing, to kind of have this 1-2 punch of outrage that, how have we brought all these, problems and conditions with us into this 21st century, but then an inspiration that, there are people on the ground that are actually working towards this. The people impacted by it are recognizing and are working for it. And so, the outrage that's in this First 1,000 Days book is that 1 in every 4 children in our world today is stunted. And in the developing world, it's 1 of every 3 children under the age of 5 is stunted, either physically, cognitively, or both at times. And the cost of that stunting to all of us, and that childhood malnutrition to all of us, is just such a high price that we're all kind of collectively paying for that by lower education of the children, lesser productivity because stunted children become stunted adults, lesser economic activity, the healthcare costs that are borne by individuals, by families, by societies, that rolls across time, and it rolls across place. So a stunted child anywhere then becomes a stunted child everywhere, and that we've gotten to the stage of 1 in 4 children in the world are still, are stunted and are malnourished. That you kind of need to smack yourself in the head and say, what's wrong with us?
Are we, Roger? Are we oblivious? I mean,
I think so. Yeah, I think when you ask, are things getting better? Kind of a positive tone. Hopefully that kind of the awareness arises. But, and kind of when you look at the overall, situation of like hunger in the world, in absolute numbers, it's declining some. Percentages, just because the population keeps growing,
Sure.
maybe declining some. But I would say that we still have this issue of 1 in 4 children in the world being stunted, of nearly 1 billion people being chronically hungry and malnourished, and another like 2 billion or so being micronutrient deficient, kind of a hidden hunger that you look at them and it's not like, that child's not, they're not like these horrible images that we have from famine and starvation zones of horribly emaciated children and adults. So they don't look that way, but they have this micronutrient deficiency that prevents them from having developed properly, either physically or, most damaging, cognitively. And that again, that we've kind of tolerated that, and we have this world where that still exists.
So,
as I say, it's this obscenity, it's this shame,
it's a shame,
on the world's conscience. And so, despite all these things that have happened, and progress that's being made, and yet, look, we're in this new millennium now, 16 years into it, with all this scientific and technological achievement that we have, and all this communications possibilities literally at our fingertips, and still we have this situation of hunger and malnourishment to such an extent.
Well, and now you start to really see the stupidity of it, to Bono's comment, right? The extreme nature of it all, and is this? Can I connect this back to unintended, as to your phrase, unintended consequences of not just U.S. foreign policy, but foreign policy in general?
Yeah, and then the domestic policy of a lot of these countries. I mean, just kind of on the hunger front, agriculture development has been so long neglected. Coming up to maybe, say, in the 1980s or early 1980s, when it was still, kind of seeing the impact of agriculture transformations and the Green Revolution and such. And so maybe, 20-25% of overall international development aid, cumulatively, kind of from the richer countries, was 20-25% to agriculture development aspects. By 2003, 2004, that was down maybe 3%, 5% or so. And then when you look at investments in nutrition, which I think, people, when they kind of think about it, would say, oh yeah, nutrition is so fundamentally important for the development not only of individuals, but of healthy, growing, strong, prosperous, stable societies in the world, that nutrition would certainly be the cornerstone of all development efforts. But still, of all the development spending that's going on, less than 1% or so was being devoted to nutrition. And it's like nutrition is everywhere in both international and domestic development, and really important in the development of our countries and societies as well. So it's everywhere, kind of in development, but it was nowhere in development strategies. And so again, kind of these, you think, well, what else were we emphasizing? Where else has the development money been spending?
Right.
And so in this book, The First 1,000 Days, so what I do is I follow moms. So the 1,000 days is from when a woman becomes pregnant to the second birthday of the child, and nutrition just so critical, and the vitamins and nutrients that everybody needs, so critical for the child as he or she are growing in the womb. Well, the mom, so how the mother is eating, then those nutrients then passed from mother to child, then in breastfeeding once the child is born, and as the child begins eating solid foods into complementary feeding, then it it is also equally critical and vital for the development of the brain. And in that period, the brain is growing most expansively, most rapidly. All these, the formation of neurons and all these synapses that are happening, and that's all fueled and accelerated by good nutrition. But yet, when you look at it, we have had no emphasis on nutrition, and this 1,000-day period has also been neglected by development thinkers and theorists and practitioners and strategists, both kind of domestically in our own communities, and then
is it, Roger? Is it the kind of thing, you mentioned it's a question of political will. Obviously, it's far more sort of complicated than just that, I suppose. And one of the things I've certainly learned working in development is just the interconnected nature of all these issues.
Yes.
There has to be a collaborative approach, and it's got to be comprehensive, absolutely. And you've got to be talking to one another in the language of choice, preferred language of choice. Whatever that means, depending on. I was thinking recently about a lot of political science literature just seems to presuppose that context isn't that important.
Right. Yeah. Right.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
And I've just done a series of interviews with filmmakers, documentarians from the Toronto International Film Festival, and for me this year, one of the themes, and I think maybe it's just a personal theme, is this notion that we just as human beings don't listen very well.
Right.
And I wonder to what degree this problem of malnutrition worldwide, globally, not just in the majority world, but everywhere, is a problem of people not paying attention.
Yeah, very much so. And so all these moms and the children and the families that I follow through the 1,000 days in India, Uganda, Guatemala, and Chicago, that's how the narrative forms of the first 1,000 days. So it centers around the lives of these moms and children and their families and the communities in these four distinct places. And what you see is that the moms instinctively know that, and practically know that these development issues, they are comprehensive, that everything is integrated,
right?
And that so even if I went into the book, figured, okay, I'm going to really look at the importance of nutrition and the impact of malnutrition and the cost of inaction of malnutrition, and that's then I certainly would see that nutrition is fundamental and a cornerstone of all development aspects of both, as I said, individuals and families, and then societies in the world as a whole. But nutrition is supported by so many other aspects of development. So water, sanitation, hygiene, infrastructure, health systems, good governance. And in the stories of all the moms and children, we see that develop through the narrative, and then also, and again, that the moms. That is, I'm going back to all these places 5-6 times in the course of 1,000 days. Chicago more frequently because it's closer.
Sure.
But then I'd spend less time perhaps at each visit with the moms of Chicago. So kind of probably cumulatively the same amount with kind of everybody that I'm writing about in the book. And from them, you see this certainly this practical knowledge that. This all needs to come together, and these development efforts need to move forward simultaneously across a wide front. So this era that we've been in for so long of, say, pet causes. Well, I do this, and I want to do that as best as possible, and I'm competing with funding against everybody else for what I do, be it building schools or putting books in schools or building clinics or digging wells, and that's what I do. But then you can't be oblivious to everything else that's going on in those communities that you're working, because everything supports everything else. So like these moms in Uganda, they're all starting, and they're all farmers. They're starting to grow under this Harvest Plus, so this biofortification project, where crops are bred. It's all kind of traditional breeding, so there's no GMOs. It's just the breeding and highlighting nutrient traits already in those crops. So the iron that's already in beans, or the zinc that's already in wheat, the vitamin A that's already in sweet potatoes, the orange sweet potatoes, and kind of highlighting those traits so that by eating these crops, which they eat every day, or even several meals a day, that just through eating these staple crops, they then get more nutrients.
Right.
And so the moms in Uganda, they're growing the orange flesh sweet potatoes, they're growing the high iron beans, and so they realize, and they can see both themselves, how the pregnancy, kind of after they've started farming these things and consuming these crops, how they feel better during their pregnancies, how kind of the birth weights of the children are up, how the children are developing. But Brenda, one of the moms then, and her boy that she gives birth to is Aaron. He's really robust and strong. Her first child, unfortunately, had died within the first 2 weeks of birth, and that was before they started growing these new crops. So here she has this robust boy born, and he's developing well. And in one trip, when I go back, I say, so Brenda, how's Aaron doing? And she starts having this kind of panic-stricken look on her face, and she begins weeping as she says, he hasn't grown much since the last time you were here, which would have been 3 or 4 months previous, and his development has stopped. I said, well, what happened? And it turns out that the well that they were getting their water from had gone bad, and dysentery was spreading throughout the village.
Oh, man.
And so
Wow.
all her efforts on the nutrition front were undermined by a few sips of bad water. And so I'm thinking, oh, yeah, well, this is tragic that it happens in these communities. And I'm back in the United States, and then you start reading about everything going on with our water system in Flint, Michigan. And then it's not only Flint, Michigan, where the water, the heavy lead content and the problems with the water there. Then reporters are finding out, oh, there's pockets all over the United States that have troubled water sources. And it's like, wow, there are all these commonalities around the world in this 1,000-day period that
Sure.
I found fascinating. And again, it's listening to, the moms, the families, the children on the ground of kind of what's going on in your life. And any development people, obviously, you would have found this certainly yourself, filmmakers that are involved and reporters in these issues, that when you sit and talk to people, you kind of hear all these responses of things that are going on in their daily lives, how they make decisions,
Yep.
all kinds of various forces of poverty and all the social forces that are going on, and how that all plays into the development of their children and their families and their own health, and how that then all needs to be put together in these development aspects.
How much of this is about education, not only of say, I guess you could say the moms on the ground, but of, as you say, domestic and local governments and local organizations, but also at a much higher level, I mean, I think one of the things I've certainly noticed, I teach in international development at Humber College in Toronto, and students every year come in with most of them sort of wide-eyed and want to change the world, and by the time they leave, a lot of them are quite negative and quite cynical and so on. Oh, gee, well, what are we going to do now? I mean, what a mess, How the heck where do we even begin, kind of a thing. And so, and yet, even still, going into some of these settings with, we've got the answers, here's what it says, or here's the chart, or here's the log frame that we're going to use that's going to make all the difference in the world. And the reality is, everything can change once you're on the ground. So I think it's about education, sort of at all levels.
Right.
But if that's true, how do you inject that into the conversation?
I agree. I mean, and it's certainly. I mean, so education is absolutely critical, and a critical part of kind of all these programs, that you may initiate or put on the ground in development aspects of all societies. And I found that, like, in speaking with the moms during their pregnancies, that probably the most common craving of pregnant women around the world is for knowledge, and particularly knowledge on the nutrition front. Well, like, what should I be doing, or what should I be eating?
Right.
Even whether it's their first child or their second, third, fourth, fifth child, it's like, well, what's new? What should I be eating? Where's that information there? And then you find out when they get the information. And so, in each of the 4 places that I'm at, there's local organizations, development workers, social workers that are working, with the moms, and so they're kind of departing this information. And so, and again, you see, this nutritional information is the same all over the world. It's basically these nutrients are humanity's common denominator, that we all know them. And so then you can see the moms. They're taking notes. They're paying attention on the foods to eat, how to cook the foods. Basic information that we would think is like kind of really basic or no-brainer type of things, but it becomes revolutionary when you're hearing these things for the first time. And so, we see that, and the phrase then, knowledge is power. And so there's this empowerment that comes with the knowledge, but then when you're faced with, because of various limitations in society, or because of the family's own poverty, that the inability then to put this knowledge into play, this knowledge is not so much power then as that knowledge becomes a burden. It's another thing that the moms know and the families know, yes, this is what we're supposed to do, but, well, we can't afford this food. or you're on the south side of Chicago, where going to a farmer's market or going to a shopping center or a grocery store, might be a fairly hazardous prospect in these times, certainly during the times of escalating violence in parts of the south side of Chicago, so you see that then becomes these kind of limiting factors. So poverty then becomes this trump card of everything, and so addressing the underlying issues of poverty and the injustices and imbalances that causes then also needs to be kind of part of all development aspects, whether they be in our cities or our rural areas, in Canada and the United States and the rich precincts of the world, or whether it's kind of development aspects for people in countries in the developing world. And so, and then the education. So not only the miles, but as you say, from the top down, that you need to get to the heads of state, to the finance minister who control the budget. So it was really interesting. So 2 weeks ago, when the World Bank held their annual fall meetings in Washington, Jim Kim, the head of the World Bank, he basically summoned all the finance ministers to a session that lasted for about 2 hours or so, where he and then others were talking about the importance of nutrition in the first 1,000 days. And what they were then talking about is this value of what they're calling gray matter infrastructure investment. So investing in the development of the brain, gray matter, because the World Bank and these finance ministers of all of these countries, they've all been focused on for decades. Oh, yeah, what we need is developing countries. We need investments in roads and bridges and airports and dams and buildings. And as well, now they're saying and realizing, hey, one thing we've been forgotten about and neglecting in all this is perhaps the most crucial investment in all, and that's the investment in particularly the cognitive development of our children.
So how do how do you go after a leader like that? So you're talking about, you talked about the cost of stunting, right? So you got productivity and education and healthcare costs and economic, and so. But Roger? What about the use the word obscenity, right? Very values laden. What about the moral question?
Right, and so and that's a really important question. So, for years, that's been the primary argument. This is a moral issue. It's an issue of decency, of humanity.
Right.
We have to end hunger. We have to end malnutrition. And clearly, that hasn't moved us far enough that we still have these problems with us. So part of this argument now that when you go to the finance ministers, you look at the cost of malnutrition, the cost of inaction, and so with this kind of rising 1,000 days movement in around the world, and say also in the United States, there's this parallel movement that's been going on called Scaling Up Nutrition, and now there's about 60 countries that are kind of members of that. These countries are starting to do economic analysis in their own countries of the cost of childhood malnutrition and stunting. And what they're finding is really eye-opening for them and kind of for the rest of us. Is that so? In countries like India, Uganda, Guatemala, where the childhood malnutrition and stunting rates are 30, 40, 50% of the child population, those annual costs to the economy are the equivalent of 6, 8, 10% equivalent of GDP loss every year because of the lost education, the lost productivity, the accumulated healthcare cost throughout society. Ethiopia did an analysis, and it was 16%. And then there's kind of then regional analysis goes on. Sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia, cumulatively in both cases, the impact of childhood malnutrition and stunting is estimated to be an annual cost of about 11% of GDP equivalency. 11%. Wow. So when you start, so that then becomes part of the education of the finance ministers, the presidents, the prime ministers, the ministers of economic development, those that are looking at the competitiveness of their countries and societies and for outside investment and things, and they're also internal investment. Look at the cost that this is having. Yes, it's always been the right thing to invest in these issues and make sure you don't have any malnourished and hungry children in your countries. it's always been the right thing to do, but now it becomes the smart thing to do. If your countries want to advance, to grow economically, to have opportunities for all, to move into middle-income countries, then you've really got to concentrate on this. So I think that then becomes the next step of this, that, yes, it's always been a moral and humanitarian issue. It's always been the right thing to do, but now it becomes the smart thing and the vital thing to do for the not only the health and development of the children and families, but for our own economies. And then globally, so the World Bank will estimate it might be 3 to 4%, several $1 trillion a year of global cost of childhood malnutrition and stunting.
So I'm going to play the idealistic card and just go, there's something about that pisses me off, Roger, that it's got to be an economic reason that's going to motivate the world into action.
Right.
There really is. I mean, you quoted Bono, I'll quote him as well. I mean, I'm pretty sure he said this isn't, or at least it's a variation of somebody else, but this isn't about charity, it's about justice. Well, if it's really if the question is really about justice, there's got to be some kind of moral inkling there. There's got to be some kind of, ethical edge to that says this is just plain wrong. This is obscene. Right. This is beyond reproach. The gap continues to grow, and what the heck are we doing about it? And I think for me, from a social change perspective, you used the word unintended consequences, and I was gonna ask you about the whole splash and ripple and the incrementalism of it all, and the little baby steps and so on. And I mean, I wonder, obviously, I think we are moving in the right direction. I just kind of sometimes wish, when it comes to these issues, wish is the wrong word, but would like to think that we can do so much better. Right. Without that much effort, for crying out loud.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And that's the underlying thing of this. I mean, we can do much better. And when you look at it, well, what are we doing to all of us and to ourselves? And and so I write in the book. I mean, there's all the so there's all this economic analysis going on, and the numbers are like big and staggering. Gee, and you ask yourself, well, why do some places of the world remain poor? Both places abroad, but in places in our own countries and societies, why do they remain so poor and kind of mired in poverty? It's largely because their children are getting off to such a lousy start in life.
Interesting.
And then you figure that it's that kind of the economic impact, and there are huge numbers, as I said, but to me, the greatest cost of malnutrition and stunting, they're immeasurable. It's like something that would benefit all of us. Like it's a song not sung, or a novel not imagined, or a poem not written. An invention not discovered, or a building not designed, or a horizon not explored. An innovation not nurtured, a cure not discovered. So what might a child have contributed to the world?
Right.
If she hadn't been stunted in 1,000 days? Look, a lost chance at greatness in a woman is a lost chance for all of us. And so that again, we would hope that everybody should be moved by this moral outrage that has to happen. So this outrage and this inspiration that we're outraged about. Certainly we can do something about it.
Sure.
And there's various inspirations that we can do something, particularly about this issue of hunger and malnutrition. But that clearly hasn't moved us collectively enough to get to where we need to be on this, because we still have, as I said, this obscenity and this stain on our conscience of hunger and malnutrition and childhood stunting. And if that hasn't moved us, and then the whole argument then also moved, it got a security aspect to it. Look, if the moral issues reasoning doesn't move you, and by God it should, but if it's not for some strange reason, look at all these security aspects of it. What kind of unstable world are we in where there are such great injustices and inequalities, and that some people are still afflicted with this medieval suffering? So what kind of stable society and world is that?
Yeah, doesn't Jeffrey Sachs...
That doesn't move you.
The end of poverty,
and if that
basically.
Doesn't move you, here's these economic movements, and what are we losing? What benefits are we not reaping potentially from all these children because they're stunted and they got off to a lousy start in life?
Yeah. Without a doubt. I mean, and we're kind of back to that whole interconnected comment, and how it's all kind of a smaller piece of a much larger puzzle. Doesn't Sachs say in The End of Poverty that his answer for people, well, why in part, well, because of terrorism and violence, essentially. I mean, I think that's one of his points that he makes in his book.
Right. Yeah, because that's if you're in one of these situations and somebody comes, with you for argument, hey, join this organization or let's do this, and you're kind of in this hopeless situation, and you may be exposed and you're seeing injustices. Well, why am I in this situation? That then becomes, in essence, I think that he talks about, also this kind of the siren song.
Sure.
And that then became like after 9/11 and kind of all the terrorism that we've seen, the burst of terrorism since then, that, how much of this is driven, or the recruitment of people and this ideology spreads, kind of, along with these inequalities and injustices in our world.
So the book. So we're going to have to wrap it up here in a few minutes, Roger. Sadly, but the book is The First 1,000 Days: A Crucial Time for Mothers and Children and the World. So you spend a lot of time laying it out and the research and the studies of these four women and their families, no doubt. Do you get into solutions at all? Do you talk about the policymakers, the domestic and foreign, and the people on the ground, and what they might be able to do?
Yes, very much so. So as one is seen, so the kind of the opening. The prologue of the book then kind of has this bigger picture thing and the statistics and this economic rationale and argument. But then starting with chapter 1, I mean, it's all about, it's the narrative flow of the moms and the children and the families in each of these four places. And then, with them, as one observes them, then it's also, well, here's what kind of these local organizations or international organizations are kind of doing on the ground, on the education aspect, on the healthcare aspect, on issues of governance, on issues of kind of behavior change, and communications of these things. And here's organizations that are then trying to move things forward on a wider front simultaneously. And so hopefully that's where one then, you have kind of the outrage of 1 in 4 children malnourished or stunted in our world. But then, here we can see things moving on the ground and where ideas, can happen. And still, even where progress is being made, then still undermined at times by this uneven development, or focusing on one cause and not another. And then on the issue of governance, I mean, one sees that really clearly, say, in Guatemala, at the beginning of the 1,000 days when I'm following the moms, the government, they're reasonably new in office, and they're saying they have targets to reduce stunting by 10%. And Guatemala has almost 50% nationwide stunting rates in Guatemala. It's the worst in the Western Hemisphere. And in the Western Highlands, where I'm following the moms and their children, it's upwards of 70% of childhood malnutrition and stunting. So that government is saying, for the sake of our competitiveness and just the sheer humanity of it all, we need to attack stunting and malnutrition. They set targets for like a reduction of 10% in 4 years, which would be, ambitious. And then by the time the 1,000 days is finished and I'm following the moms in the Western Highlands, how are they impacted by all this and by what the government's saying and, whatever programs there are? By the time of my reporting, the leaders of the government are out of office. Some of them are in jail. There's been a corruption thing. And all these efforts are basically, kind of washed away by all this, by the corruption and the scandals and everything and in fact, then some of that then, is like, well, this government really, prized, reducing malnutrition, or at least rhetorically. Well, where did that get them? They kind of end up in out of office and discredited for other actions, not on the nutrition front. So it's like, that issue. So do we want to try that again? The new government is starting to emphasize malnutrition and reducing stunting again. But you see there the crucial nature of it has to have the support of the government.
Sure.
Because these moms, when the children were coming to the age of 1 and getting their 1-year-old vaccines, there weren't even any vaccines available in these areas, in the clinics and in the hospitals. And a lot of the local clinics were being shut down because there was no money in the system. The health budget had been the health ministry budget had been pillaged, and it's like, wow. So all this rhetoric is just so hollow because, again, listening to the moms and the families on the ground, what's actually happening? What are we getting out of all this rhetoric and talk? Nothing's happening here. In fact, things are actually getting worse. And so, that through the narrative of this, you start to see, hopefully what the reader sees, these are important initiatives that are happening. We can see how, this agriculture that emphasizes nutrition, how that's important, the nutritious value of the crops, how kind of behavior change communications is important in altering some practices, like even the United States and the addiction the moms have of these flaming hot Cheetos and these snack foods and stuff that are not good at all for their health, realizing to eat healthy. It's kind of all these changes that have to happen. So you see kind of, what needs to be done and what is being done, and then also how still kind of holes and troubles with healthcare systems and infrastructure and things, and then kind of constantly still undermines those things. So hopefully, one becomes really aware of, here's what is being done. Here's some, there's the outrage and the inspiration,
sure,
and still what needs to be done, and this kind of integrative, comprehensive development
the
method that we got to do it all simultaneously. And as you say, so critical. You just have to listen to people on the ground, because these moms, these families, they're living it daily. They know it instinctively. What needs to go on, and we just need to really listen to them.
Sort of a here's the reality, and here's our response.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So you mentioned really quickly. You mentioned campaigns. You mentioned was it the 1,000 Days campaign?
Or movement, I guess. So there's an organization called there's like the 1,000 Days organization in Washington D.C. that is kind of coordinating. Certainly the awareness raising, the communications that are need for the 1,000
days. Yeah, that's 1000days.org, is it not?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. So this is a good way for people to get involved. There's a lot of information there. You can donate. You can read more. You can dig.
Exactly. And I think what we all need, what's incumbent on all of us, people are thinking, so what can I do?
Yeah.
It's to really to I'm always saying, raise the clamor on these things.
Nice.
And say, this is why it's important, the 1,000 days. This is the cost of our inaction and what we're all bearing, but that we can do something about it and raise the clamor. That basically, my hope would be that the 1,000 days, or the phrase, the first 1,000 days, then becomes this household word, this household phrase,
sure,
all over the world, that in Canada, in the United States, in Europe, and throughout the developing world, that when you hear the phrase, the first 1,000 days, you don't need an explanation. You know immediately what time frame it is, what the important issues are, and why it's so important for all of us. And so it becomes kind of the new kind of cornerstone or paradigm, I guess, that one is a prism that one is looking at all development efforts through. That what are we doing that really then improves nutrition, water, sanitation, hygiene, infrastructure, everything, governance, that's really improving the conditions in that 1,000-day period.
Well, I want to thank you for your time today, Roger Thurow. He's a senior fellow at the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. His book, The First 1,000 Days, A Crucial Time for Mothers and Children in the World, it's available on Amazon. And check the organization 1000days.org online out as well for more information about how you can get involved. Roger, thanks for your time and for your work. I want to say congratulations. And you were just up here recently, and I'm so sorry I missed you, and up here in Ontario, and hopefully we'll get to meet sometime in the near future. But yeah, so appreciate the work you're doing.
Well, thank you. I'd be delighted to come back, because I found a lot of interest and excitement around this issue, and a lot of caring and fellow travelers who also want to. I don't know if that's a proper phrase.
No, sir. No, it's fine. But, hey, I know what the
but comrades in the struggle who will also raise comrades too. Compatriots in the struggle that will also raise the clamor.
And I think next time we chat, I want to find out what the final word on craft dinner is. I think I need to know.
Oh, right. Okay. I can do that.
Excellent. Roger, thanks a lot for your time again today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, and delighted to share this time with you and your listeners.
Thanks.